Maya Chen stared at her laptop screen in the dim light of her studio apartment, the numbers on her bank account mocking her with their cruel simplicity. $247.83. Rent was due in 3 days, and her latest client had delayed payment again. At 32, she'd mastered the art of surviving on ramen and determination, but some months tested even her resilience. The sound of her neighbor's television bled through paper-thin walls as she closed her design portfolio. Another day of pitching logos to startup founders who wanted something iconic like Nike's swoosh, but for $500. She'd built her freelance graphic design business from nothing, one rejected proposal at a time. 15 years. The number haunted her daily. 15 years since her parents, David and Linda Chen, had chosen their narrow interpretation of faith over their only daughter. She could still hear her father's voice, cold and final. "This lifestyle is not welcome in our home. You've made your choice." Her crime? Falling in love with Jessica Morrison, her college roommate. Her punishment? Complete abandonment. Maya had been 17, a high school senior with college acceptance letters and dreams of studying art. Instead, she'd found herself sleeping on Jessica's dorm room floor, working 3 jobs to pay for community college, watching her parents erase her from their lives as if she'd never existed. They'd even removed her photos from the mantle. The only family member who hadn't turned away was Aunt Helen Wong, her father's older sister. Helen had been excommunicated from the family decades earlier for her own sins, being a successful unmarried career woman who traveled the world and collected art instead of producing grandchildren. She'd reached out to Maya through Facebook, offering not just emotional support, but practical help. A couch to sleep on during breaks, job references, and most importantly, unconditional love. "Family isn't just blood, sweetheart," Helen had told her over countless dinners in her Victorian mansion. "It's the people who choose to stay." Helen had been Maya's anchor through everything. Dropping out of her 4-year university when money ran out, the heartbreak when Jessica's parents convinced her to date someone more suitable, the countless nights wondering if her parents ever thought about her, ever regretted their choice. For 15 years, Helen had been her whole family. Birthdays, holidays, celebrations, and sorrows. Helen was there. When Maya finally scraped together enough for her own apartment, Helen helped her move. When Maya's design business struggled, Helen commissioned projects she didn't need just to keep money flowing. Then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Maya had spent Helen's final 6 months sleeping in the guest room of the mansion, driving to chemo appointments, researching experimental treatments, and holding Helen's hand through the worst pain either of them had ever experienced. She'd watched her aunt, brilliant, vibrant Helen, who'd climbed mountains in Nepal and negotiated art deals in Paris, waste away to nothing. Helen died on a Tuesday morning in April, peacefully in her sleep with Maya beside her. The funeral had been small but beautiful, filled with Helen's diverse collection of friends, artists, travelers, entrepreneurs, and the young people she'd mentored over the years. Maya had delivered the eulogy, her voice breaking as she spoke about the woman who'd shown her that love wasn't conditional. Her parents hadn't come. Maya hadn't expected them to. Helen had been dead to them long before cancer claimed her. Now, 3 weeks later, Maya sat in her cramped apartment, grieving the only family she'd known and facing an uncertain future without her anchor. Helen's lawyer had called about the will reading, but Maya assumed she'd inherit some personal items, maybe a small savings account. Helen had lived comfortably but had never flaunted wealth. The knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Maya glanced at the clock, 11:30 p.m. Too late for visitors, too early for emergencies. She approached the peephole cautiously. Her world tilted. David and Linda Chen stood in the hallway, looking older but unmistakable. Her father's hair had gone completely gray. Her mother had gained weight, but their faces were exactly as she remembered from that terrible night 15 years ago. Maya's hand trembled as she stepped back from the door. They knocked again, more insistently. "Maya?" Her mother's voice, tentative but audible through the thin door. "Maya, we know you're there. We need to talk." Maya's hands shook as she unlocked the door. David and Linda stood there awkwardly, her father clutching a small bouquet of grocery store flowers, her mother dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "Maya, sweetheart," Linda whispered, attempting to step forward. "We heard about Helen. We're so sorry for your loss." "Sweetheart." The word felt like a slap. Maya remained in the doorway, blocking their entrance. "How did you find me?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Your cousin Jennifer mentioned, well, she told us about the funeral," David said, his eyes darting around her shabby apartment visible behind her. "We wanted to come, but we weren't sure you'd want us there." The lie hung between them like poison. Maya knew exactly why they hadn't come. Helen had been as dead to them as Maya herself. "What do you want?" she asked. Linda's face crumpled in practiced grief. "We've made terrible mistakes, honey. These past years, not a day has gone by that we haven't regretted." 15 years, Maya cut her off. 15 years of silence. "We were wrong," David said, his voice carrying the rehearsed tone of someone who'd practiced this speech. "We were scared, confused. Our faith, we let it blind us to what really mattered. Family." Maya studied their faces, searching for genuine remorse. Instead, she saw calculation. Her mother's eyes kept drifting past her into the apartment. Her father shifted nervously, checking his phone. "We'd like to take you to dinner," Linda said, "to talk properly, to start making amends." Before Maya could respond, a man in an expensive suit appeared behind them in the hallway. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen, I'm Robert Caldwell, the family attorney we discussed." Maya's blood chilled. "Family attorney?" "Perhaps this isn't the best time," the man said, glancing at Maya. "Given the recent developments with the estate." Estate. The word hit her like a physical blow. They knew about Helen's will. They knew before they'd knocked on her door. "You knew," Maya said quietly. "About the inheritance." David's face flushed. "Maya, that's not why—" "How much?" she asked, her voice growing stronger. "How much did Helen leave me?" The lawyer looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately with the family." "I am her family," Maya snapped. "Her only family." Linda reached out to touch Maya's arm. "Darling, we know Helen left you everything. $3.2 million. The house, the art collection. It's wonderful, but it's also overwhelming. You're so young to handle such responsibility." Maya jerked away from her mother's touch. The fake concern, the sudden endearments, the convenient timing. It all crystallized into perfect, nauseating clarity. "You want the money," she said. "We want to help you," David insisted. "We're your parents. We have experience with investments, property management. You abandoned me." "We made mistakes," Linda said, tears flowing freely now. "But we're here now. We want to be a family again." Maya looked at the three of them, her parents with their desperate, greedy eyes, and their lawyer with his briefcase full of papers designed to separate her from Helen's legacy. For 15 years, she'd fantasized about this moment. Her parents returning, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. In her dreams, she'd been generous, understanding. She'd forgiven them and rebuilt the family she'd lost. Reality was so much uglier. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "Let's talk." Maya's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup as her parents and their lawyer spread documents across Helen's antique dining table. 3 days had passed since their reunion, and she'd played the role of grateful, overwhelmed daughter perfectly. The trust structure would protect the assets, Robert Caldwell explained, sliding papers toward her. Your parents would serve as trustees, managing investments while you retain beneficial ownership. Beneficial ownership. Legal speak for having her name on paper while they controlled everything. It sounds so complicated, Maya said, injecting just enough uncertainty into her voice. I never expected. Aunt Helen and I talked about art and travel, not money management. David reached across the table, patting her hand with paternal concern that made her skin crawl. That's exactly why. You need guidance, sweetheart. We've spent years building our investment portfolio. We understand these things. Maya nodded thoughtfully, then excused herself to use the bathroom. Instead, she slipped into Helen's study, where she'd been conducting her real business for the past 3 days. The private investigator she'd hired, Marcus Rivera, had been thorough. His initial report lay spread across Helen's mahogany desk. Financial records showing her parents' mounting debt, social media posts from their perfect family with their 2 younger children, the replacements who'd apparently been worth keeping, and most damning of all, phone records showing they'd contacted Helen's lawyer within hours of the obituary being published. They'd been planning this before Maya even knew about the inheritance. But Marcus had uncovered something else, something that cut deeper than greed. Hidden in Helen's bedroom, Maya had found her aunt's private journals, decades of entries documenting the family's rejection. Helen had tried repeatedly to reconcile with David over the years, sending birthday cards, graduation announcements, even wedding invitations. All returned to sender or ignored completely. The most recent entries chronicled Helen's attempts to reach out when she was diagnosed. She'd called David, hoping terminal cancer might bridge their divide. He'd hung up on her. She'd written letters. They went unanswered. Even facing death, Helen had been deemed unworthy of forgiveness for the sin of loving who she chose to love. Maya photographed every relevant page. The fake reconciliation meetings she'd arranged were proceeding flawlessly. Tomorrow, her parents would meet with estate attorneys, actually Marcus's theater friends, who would record their true intentions. She'd already captured damning audio from their private conversations in the guest room, including Linda's gloating phone call to a friend. Maya's so naive. She actually thinks we missed her. By Christmas, we'll have control of everything. But Maya wanted more than recorded confessions. She wanted justice that Helen would have appreciated, public, complete, and artistically perfect. Helen's memorial service was scheduled for Saturday, 2 weeks away. Maya had originally planned a small, intimate gathering, but she'd recently expanded the invitation list. Extended family members who'd shunned both Helen and Maya, community leaders Helen had worked with, art collectors from her circle, and journalists from the arts community Helen had supported. Over 100 people would attend, including several family members who'd spent decades justifying their cruelty toward Helen with religious righteousness. Maya had personally called each relative, playing the grieving niece seeking family connection in her time of loss. They'd all agreed to come, curious about Helen's mysterious final years and, undoubtedly, her estate. Maya had prepared a special video presentation for the service, Hawar, a celebration of Helen's life that would begin with beautiful memories and photographs. The first half would showcase Helen's achievements, her travels, her art collection, and her generous mentorship of young people. The second half would feature her parents. Marcus had provided recording equipment so sophisticated it was nearly invisible. Every conversation, every reveal of their true motives, every cruel comment about Helen and Maya had been captured in crystal-clear audio and video. The most damning footage came from the previous evening when they'd thought Maya was asleep. Her mother had actually laughed while describing Helen as that pathetic spinster who finally made herself useful. Maya had also crafted legal documentation with Helen's actual attorney, not the fraud Caldwell her parents had brought. Attempted financial fraud carried serious penalties, especially when targeting a grieving heir. The timing of their approach, the forged documents Caldwell had prepared, and their deliberate deception created a solid legal case. But the real masterstroke would be the revelation of their other children. Through Marcus's investigation, Maya had learned that David and Linda had been telling extended family for years that Maya had died in a car accident. They'd used her death to garner sympathy, while privately raising 2 other children they deemed acceptable. Those children, now teenagers, had no idea Maya existed. They believed they were their parents' only offspring. Maya smiled as she returned to the dining room, where her parents waited with their fraudulent paperwork and calculated concern. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told them, settling back into her chair, "about family being what matters most." Her father beamed. "Exactly, sweetheart. We're here now. We want to make up for lost time." "I'd like that," Maya said sweetly. "I'm so grateful you both came back to me." The performance began in earnest on Thursday morning. Maya sat across from the fake estate attorneys in a downtown conference room, watching her parents' masks slip further with each passing minute. "Miss Chen seems quite capable of managing her own affairs," said attorney Margaret Walsh, actually a retired theater professor Marcus had recruited. "Perhaps a simple financial advisor would suffice rather than a full trust structure." Linda's smile grew brittle. "You don't understand. Maya's never handled serious money. She's lived paycheck to paycheck her entire adult life. She needs experienced guidance." "I appreciate your concern," Maya said softly, "but maybe I should try managing things myself first." David's face flushed. "Sweetheart, that's exactly the kind of naive thinking that could cost you everything. The art market alone is incredibly complex. Without proper oversight, you could lose Helen's entire collection to bad investments or theft." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting your daughter is incompetent?" "Of course not," Linda said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. "We're simply being realistic about her limitations." Maya secretly activated the recording app on her phone. "What kind of limitations?" An uncomfortable silence stretched across the room. Robert Caldwell, their actual lawyer, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should focus on the legal structures rather than personal assessments." But David was already in too deep. "Maya, you dropped out of college. You've never owned property or managed investments. You're 32 and living in a studio apartment. Helen's estate requires sophisticated understanding." "That I clearly lack," Maya finished, her voice trembling with perfectly performed hurt. "We didn't say that," Linda backtracked desperately. "You didn't have to." Maya stood, gathering her purse. "I need some air." She left them scrambling to repair the damage, their lawyer frantically trying to explain away their client's implications of her incompetence. Outside, Maya smiled grimly. The recording would be devastating in court. That evening brought even better material. Maya had mentioned during dinner that she was considering donating Helen's entire art collection to museums. "You can't be serious," David exploded, abandoning all pretense of supportive parent. "Those pieces are worth millions." "Helen always said art should be shared," Maya replied innocently. "Helen was an eccentric old woman who never understood real-world economics," Linda snapped. "You can't just give away a fortune because of some sentimental notion about sharing art." Maya blinked in apparent shock at her mother's venom. "I thought you said Helen was wonderful, that you were sorry she died." "We are sorry," David said, backtracking. "But being sorry doesn't mean we have to honor every whimsical idea she might have had about philanthropy." Maya excused herself again, ostensibly to call Helen's former art dealer about donation procedures. Instead, she called Marcus. "They're getting desperate," she reported. David actually used the word incompetent in front of witnesses today, and they just called Helen an eccentric old woman who didn't understand economics. "Perfect," Marcus said. "My theater friends said your parents spent 20 minutes after you left trying to figure out how to have you declared mentally unfit to inherit. They're consulting with a different lawyer tomorrow about guardianship proceedings." Maya's blood chilled. They were moving faster than she'd anticipated. Guardianship? Adult guardianship for financial incapacity. It's a long shot, but if they could prove you're unable to manage the inheritance due to mental health issues or cognitive limitations, they'd control everything. Exactly. We need to accelerate our timeline. Friday brought the most disturbing revelations yet. Maya pretended to have a panic attack over the inheritance's complexity, sobbing about feeling overwhelmed and incapable. Her parents' response was telling. "Maybe you should see someone," Linda suggested with false concern. "A therapist, someone who could help you process your limitations." "Document this," David added helpfully, "for your own protection." They were literally trying to build a paper trail of her mental instability. That evening, Maya staged her masterstroke. She called her parents into Helen's study, where she'd arranged Helen's financial documents in apparent chaos across the desk. "I don't understand any of this," she said, gesturing helplessly at the papers. "The numbers are too big. I keep making mistakes. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not smart enough for this." David and Linda exchanged a look of barely concealed triumph. "Sweetheart," her father said gently, "there's no shame in recognizing your limits. That's actually very mature." "We could help you," Linda added, "just temporarily, until you feel more confident." "Would you really do that?" Maya asked, her voice small and grateful. "Even after everything that happened between us?" "You're our daughter," David said, the lie flowing smoothly. "Of course we'd help." Maya nodded tearfully. "Okay, I'll sign whatever papers you think are best. I trust you completely." The naked greed that flashed across their faces was breathtaking. Linda actually licked her lips. "There's just one thing," Maya continued. "Helen wanted me to have a memorial service for her. This Saturday. I've invited some family and friends. Would you come? As my parents?" "Of course, darling," Linda said, already mentally spending Helen's money. "We'll be right there beside you." After they left the study, Maya sat alone among Helen's books and artifacts, feeling the weight of what she'd set in motion. Tomorrow, over 100 people would witness the complete destruction of her parents' lives. Their greed, their manipulation, their abandonment of both her and Helen would be exposed in devastating detail. Part of her felt sick about it. But then she remembered Helen's journal entries, the pain of a dying woman reaching out to family who couldn't spare her even basic human decency. She remembered 15 years of birthdays, graduations, and holidays spent alone because she'd loved the wrong person. She remembered her mother's laugh as she called Helen a pathetic spinster. Maya opened Helen's final journal entry, dated just a week before her death. "I hope Maya knows how proud I am of the woman she's become. She survived what would have destroyed weaker people. She built herself from nothing, with no family support, no safety net, no guidance except what I could provide. She's stronger than any of them. I hope someday she realizes that strength isn't just for surviving. It's for protecting others from the same cruelty we endured." Maya closed the journal and began preparing for tomorrow's memorial service. Helen had been right about her strength. It was time to use it. The memorial service began beautifully. Helen's garden bloomed with spring. flowers as over 100 guests mingled among the art installations she'd collected during her travels. Maya had transformed the space into a celebration of her aunt's life, complete with photo displays and her favorite classical music drifting through hidden speakers. David and Linda stood beside Maya near the podium, playing their roles as supportive, reunited parents. Extended family members who hadn't spoken to Helen in decades offered Maya condolences and praised Helen's finally bringing the family together. Uncle James, David's older brother, shook Maya's hand warmly. "It's so wonderful that your parents found their way back to you, dear. Helen would have been thrilled to see the family healing." Maya smiled graciously, her hand resting on the laptop that would soon shatter every illusion in the garden. "Thank you all for coming," Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the wireless microphone. "Helen meant everything to me, and I know she would be overwhelmed by this gathering of people whose lives she touched." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Maya's parents beamed beside her, clearly enjoying their role as the reconciled family. "I've prepared a video tribute to celebrate Helen's remarkable life," Maya continued. "I hope it captures the woman we all loved and admired." The large screen she'd positioned near the rose garden flickered to life. For the first 10 minutes, the presentation was exactly what the audience expected. Beautiful photographs of Helen's travels, her art collection, testimonials from the young people she'd mentored, and footage of her various charitable works. The guests watched with appropriate reverence, many dabbing at their eyes during particularly touching moments. Maya noticed her parents relaxing, confident that this public event would cement their image as the loving family Helen had always wanted them to be. Then the tone shifted. "Helen's greatest sorrow," Maya's voice narrated, over a photo of a much younger Helen with her arms around teenage David, "was the family that rejected her for loving authentically." The screen filled with pages from Helen's journals, her handwriting clearly visible as Maya read excerpts. "David returned my Christmas card unopened again this year. I wonder if he even remembers that I helped raise him when our parents worked double shifts." Uncomfortable shifting began in the audience. David's face paled. Helen tried for decades to reconcile with family members who had decided her life choices made her unworthy of love, Maya continued. The screen showed returned letters, disconnected phone records, and Helen's heartbreaking journal entries documenting years of rejection. Linda grabbed Maya's arm. "What are you doing?" she hissed. Maya gently removed her mother's hand and continued. "Even when Helen was dying, she reached out to family members, hoping terminal cancer might bridge the gap that judgment had created." The video showed copies of Helen's final, attempts at reconciliation, voicemails to David that went unreturned, letters to Linda that were never answered, and most damning of all, phone records showing David had hung up on Helen when she called to tell him about her diagnosis. The garden had gone completely silent except for Maya's steady narration. But Helen's greatest joy in her final months was the family she'd chosen, the family that chose to love her unconditionally. The screen filled with photos of Maya and Helen together, holidays, birthdays, gallery openings, and finally, Maya holding Helen's hand in the hospital during chemo treatments. "Helen left me everything because I was there when she needed family most," which makes recent developments particularly interesting. Maya clicked to the next section, and her parents' voices filled the garden through the sound system. "Maya's so naive. She actually thinks we missed her. By Christmas, we'll have control of everything." Linda's recorded laughter was sharp and cruel. Gasps erupted from the audience. David stepped forward, reaching for the laptop, but Maya had anticipated this. Marcus appeared beside her, physically blocking David's access. The recordings continued, David calling Maya incompetent, Linda describing Helen as a pathetic spinster, And most damning of all, their discussion about having Maya declared mentally unfit to inherit. The art market alone is incredibly complex, David's recorded voice declared. Without proper oversight, she could lose Helen's entire collection. The crowd watched in horrified fascination as Maya's parents were exposed as vultures circling an inheritance they felt entitled to claim. But Maya wasn't finished. Perhaps the most interesting discovery, she said, her voice never wavering, is that my parents have been telling extended family for years that I died in a car accident. Uncle James's face went white. Cousin Jennifer covered her mouth in shock. They used my supposed death to gain sympathy while raising 2 replacement children they deemed more acceptable than their lesbian daughter. Photos of David and Linda's other children appeared on screen, teenagers who had no idea Maya existed. These are Tyler and Sarah Chen, ages 16 and 14. They believe they're their parents' only children because David and Linda found it easier to kill me off narratively than admit they'd abandoned their own daughter for falling in love with the wrong person. The recordings resumed with David's voice. We can't have Maya interfering with Tyler's college applications. What if someone asks about family history? The garden erupted in angry murmurs. Extended family members turned on David and Linda with expressions of disgust and betrayal. Maya raised her hand for silence. There's one more thing. She nodded to Marcus, who approached with official documents and 2 police officers who had been waiting at the garden's edge. David and Linda Chen, Officer Martinez announced formally, you're under arrest for attempted financial fraud and conspiracy to defraud an estate. As handcuffs clicked around her parents' wrists, Maya spoke one final time. Helen taught me that family is about choice, love, and showing up when it matters. Today, in front of everyone who claimed to love her, you've shown exactly what kind of family you choose to be. The crowd parted as her parents were led away, their protests drowned out by the disgusted voices of relatives who finally understood the truth. 6 months later, Maya stood in the same garden where she'd destroyed her parents' lives, but the space had been transformed. The Helen Wong Foundation's first annual scholarship ceremony was underway, with 12 LGBTQ+ youth receiving full college funding after being rejected by their families. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly. David and Linda pled guilty to attempted fraud to avoid a lengthy trial that would have brought even more public humiliation. They received 2 years probation, substantial fines, and a permanent restraining order preventing them from contacting Maya. Their lawyer, Robert Caldwell, lost his license for participating in the scheme. More devastating than legal consequences was their complete social exile. Extended family members had cut all contact after learning the truth about their cruelty toward both Helen and Maya. Their church community, horrified by their deception and greed, asked them to leave. Even their neighbors in the suburban development they'd called home for 20 years began avoiding them. Maya had heard through Marcus that they'd been forced to sell their house to pay legal fees and were now renting a small apartment across town. David had lost his management position when the scandal went viral on social media. Linda's part-time job at a boutique ended when customers recognized her from news coverage. Their other children, Tyler and Sarah, had been the most devastating casualties. Learning they had an older sister their parents had erased was traumatic enough. Discovering their parents' capacity for such calculated cruelty had shattered their trust completely. Both teenagers had chosen to live with relatives rather than remain in their parents' custody. Maya felt no satisfaction in their destruction. The revenge that had seemed so necessary, so justified, now felt hollow. The real victory wasn't in their suffering. It was in what she'd built from the ashes of her own pain. Maya, 17-year-old Marcus Thompson, approached hesitantly. He was one of the foundation's first recipients, kicked out by religious parents for coming out as transgender. The photographer wants a picture with all the scholarship winners. Maya smiled at the young man who reminded her so much of herself at that age, brilliant, wounded, but determined to survive. Of course. Are you excited about starting at Berkeley in the fall? His face lit up. I still can't believe it's real. A full ride, plus housing support, plus the mentorship program. It's like having a family again. A family again. Maya's throat tightened. That was exactly what she'd hoped to create. The foundation had grown beyond her wildest expectations. Helen's art collection had sold for far more than anticipated, and combined with the real estate holdings, Maya had endowed scholarships that would help hundreds of young people over the coming decades. The mentorship program connected recipients with successful LGBTQ+ professionals who understood the unique challenges of building a life without family support. Maya had also kept Helen's Victorian mansion, converting part of it into transitional housing for LGBTQ+ youth aging out of foster care. The house that had sheltered her during her darkest moments now provided the same sanctuary for others. As she posed for photos with the scholarship recipients, Maya caught sight of a familiar figure at the garden's edge. Tyler Chen, now 18, stood uncertainly by the gate. She excused herself and walked over to him. Tyler. She wasn't sure what else to say. This was their first face-to-face meeting. I wanted to apologize, he said quietly, for what they did, to you and to Aunt Helen. Sarah and we had no idea you existed. Maya studied her half-brother's face, searching for traces of David's manipulation or Linda's calculating nature. Instead, she saw genuine remorse and a young man struggling with the revelation that his entire childhood had been built on lies. You don't need to apologize for their choices, Maya said gently. You were children. I start college next month, Tyler said. I wanted to ask, would it be okay if I used Chen as my last name? I know I don't have the right to claim you as family, but I don't want to carry theirs anymore. Maya felt tears threaten for the first time in months. Tyler, family isn't about blood or names. It's about the people who choose to show up for each other. She pulled one of the foundation's business cards from her pocket. If you ever need anything, advice, support, just someone to talk to, call me. That's what family does. As Tyler walked away with the card clutched in his hand, Maya returned to the garden party. Helen's favorite jazz music played softly as young people who'd been thrown away by their families celebrated new beginnings. Maya touched the locket around her neck, containing Helen's photo, and smiled. This community of chosen family, this legacy of love transforming pain into purpose, this was revenge perfected. Not destruction, but creation. Not pulling others down, but lifting them up. Helen would have been proud.